I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker here. Tony Wasley is the director of the Nevada Department of Wildlife, and he's also the president of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And I'm pleased to have him here today to share some of the innovative and adaptive ways that the association is involved at the national level and opportunities. And really, Tony's just been such a strong partner for RBFF in the community. So please.
Thanks, Stephanie. Welcome, everyone, to the face of institutional gravity. I am a stale, that was a joke. I have a really dry delivery and a really dry sense of humor, so bear with me. There might be more jokes. Hopefully, I don't have to point those out as we go through. But I want to, I had several pages of notes, but as I sat and listened this morning, I started making more notes, and I started making more notes, and there were several things that I thought was really relevant, really important to bring up. I definitely am an old white guy, but I want to share something. About 8 or 9 years ago, I sat at a national meeting, and I was probably the back 2/3 of the meeting, and there was somebody up on stage, and a nameless person in a nameless Midwestern city that sounded something like Charlie Brown's teacher. And I sat there by myself, and I looked, and the only thing as I looked across the crowd, the only thing that was more numerous than empty chairs was bald white heads. And I thought, holy cow, where are we headed? Where are we going in conservation? Where is the youth? Where's the diversity? There wasn't any ethnic diversity in the room, no gender diversity. So despite the fact that I am old and white and male, I like to at least believe that I'm a little bit of an outlier. And I'll point no further than my mom, who's an avid angler. My sister, I'll put her up against anybody in this room back in a trailer down a ramp. I've seen her wow many a crowd at a crowded boat ramp. My daughter, who's a fisheries biologist, a couple years ago, I gave her the option to go anywhere, do anything in the world for a summer vacation, and she chose to go fishing. She said, I want to go catch trout in streams in this place. So there is that aspect in terms of the gender piece, but I also want to speak to a story that when I was in college and studying biology, I had a classmate, Palestinian gentleman, Ahmad Rashid, he was great in chemistry, and he helped me immeasurably get through organic chemistry. And I was preparing to, through winter break, getting ready to go on a fishing trip with a bunch of my redneck friends in a little logging town. And Amjad said, I'd like to go with you. And my redneck friends, they didn't go to college. And so I was faced with, I'm going to take this foreign student who struggles a little bit with language home to my redneck logging friends, and we're going to go fishing. I said, sure, let's go. So we piled in the pickup and we went fishing, and I loaned him some gear, and he took off down the beach fishing. And about 15 minutes later, he came walking down the beach with half a rod, and he said, Tony, I'm sorry. He said, I went to cast, and the bopper broke the wire, and I lost half of your Fenwick. And I realized at that point that it was a bobber, and it was line, and it was a Fenwick, and we had more barriers than just ethnic, gender, age, but we have a whole vocabulary, a whole vernacular that presents significant barriers. Now, I don't know if Amjad ever went fishing again. I'm sure he still tells some of those stories, and I've got some more, but they're not suitable for being on stage, but I'm happy to share them with you later. So I'm here, I'm listening to all this great science, all this great data, and I'm thinking, boy, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question. And that's where you all come in. Of course, disproportionate reliance on Rob Southwick, the data. We need that. And so I'm asking myself, why am I here? What can I provide to this conversation? And really, we heard, this is an opportunity for new ideas to take home and apply, to open your minds to creativity, increase awareness, and maybe some of the adaptive work. So as I kind of stand here before you with this great opportunity to share something, I ask myself, what can I add to this conversation? So just, if you haven't already picked it up, the story I tell myself is I'm a simple, small-town, blue-collar, trained as a wildlife biologist, and I found Jennifer's story of being trained as a wildlife biologist and then a communicator and now a marketer. That's a model that fits in a lot of our agencies, and I think the takeaway message there for me is that seek the skill set that you want instead of trying to convert people who've been trained in something else. We've heard that several times, and Brad highlighted that as well. But my why, that we also heard referenced earlier, my purpose and my passion is the outdoors. Healthy, thriving fish and wildlife, healthy land, clean water, achieved and maintained through an engaged, diverse, and mindful citizenry is my purpose. So what can I offer you here today that is in any way different or unique to you or your world? So when I asked myself that question, one thing came to mind. Perspective from two different places. The first perspective of a state wildlife agency director from a unique state in Nevada that could very well be the future of your state. As you look at Nevada, there is no true ethnic majority. We have the first and only female majority legislature, and we have a growing group of mutualists, wildlife value orientation. Mutualists are people who see animals as part of their extended social network, seeing animals as having rights equal to those of humans. The second perspective is as the current president of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, where I've had the opportunity to peek behind the curtain on a whole host of issues that might otherwise be unnoticed or only individually or occasionally recognized. So it'll be perspective from those two positions that I'll share with you today, the director for the Nevada Department of Wildlife and the current president of AFWA. So perspective, according to Henry David Thoreau, is not what you look at, but rather what you see. What Thoreau was obviously saying is that what you see is defined by who you are, where you've been, where you are, what your values are, among other things. So I'm guessing that most of you flew to get here. I flew here yesterday, and as I sat on the plane, I kind of was contemplating perspective. Several things occurred to me. Other than the obvious differences in what lie below the plane on the left side versus the right side, even people sitting on the same side with the same view saw different things based on their life experiences, their careers, their interests, and their values. Golf courses, reservoirs, fire scars, mountains, valleys, cities, etc., all viewed uniquely in the eye of the beholder. Change is inevitable, and it's evident all around us. Adapting and innovating to engage new customers. That's our theme here. Let's assume the need for new customers is a given and focus on the why it is that we would want to adapt and innovate. So we live in an ever-changing world, and according to Heather McGowan in her book, The Adaptive Advantage, our present moment is the most stable time we will ever experience the rest of our careers as it relates to technology, social media, science. Human Dimensions work by Mike Manfredo at Colorado State University, along with others from Ohio State University, has documented rapid and significant change in American wildlife values. Nevada is the epicenter for many of those changes. I mentioned mutualists before. Nevada is the driest state in the country, one of the most urbanized states in the country, no true majority. We truly are a test case in a lot of ways, but I also believe it's the future of many of your states. Similar work in Canada and globally in terms of the Human Dimensions piece are documenting change in the way humans view and value nature. The words adapt and innovate are ways we can respond to this change. Although we've all heard people fear change, it isn't the change they fear as much as it is the uncertainty and what exactly that means for them in their roles. Uncertainty disrupts our plans. We're hearing a lot about our 3 plans. We've all heard that a goal without a plan is nothing but a wish. So clearly those plans are a pretty important piece towards implementation. We make plans for our future, plans for our programs, plans for achieving our goals. We invest financially and emotionally in our plans. Sometimes being adaptable and innovative require modifying or even abandoning a plan. A drought, a pandemic, or people's values require us to be more adaptive and innovative than many of us have been throughout our careers. Like Iron Mike Tyson once quipped, everybody's got a plan right up until they get punched in the face. It would be best to adapt and innovate before getting punched in the face, but in the case of a pandemic, some things are just unavoidable, and the adaptation and innovation must happen afterwards. The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies has a number of examples of adaptation and innovation that are ongoing. One that I'd like to speak to is the Relevancy Roadmap. How many people are familiar with the Relevancy Roadmap? Excellent. A lot of hands. I heard Jennifer mention Tennessee's desire to mean more to more people. The Relevancy Roadmap is all about enhanced conservation through broader engagement. The Relevancy Roadmap is available on AFWA's webpage if you haven't seen it, if you're interested. Breaks barriers to relevancy down into unique categories that are cultural or capacity or political or legislative. Landscape conservation is another arena in which the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is being adaptive and innovative. There's a growing desire, energy from the non-governmental organization community to be involved in conservation. With respect to state authorities, it's important that we look more broadly across jurisdictional boundaries, more inclusive with potential partners. I heard somebody in here earlier talk about the importance of those partners, what they bring, their perspective, their energy, that capacity. Another area is in One Health. One Health is the notion of humans, animals, and ecosystems and the overlap between those. We know that 75% of the emerging pathogens in the world are zoonotic, meaning their origin is in animals. 60% of those are from wildlife. The human-wildlife interaction is significantly affected by the animal ecosystem relationship. So it's critically important. It's an area where you can anticipate to see more and more energy from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. When I first heard One Health, I thought it was brand new and it was related only to the ongoing pandemic. And then I learned the CDC initiated a One Health initiative. I think it was 2006. Then I learned that One Health had been around for at least 100 years, and for indigenous peoples, probably thousands of years. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've seen a lot of data, heard a lot of discussion this morning on the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, this is an area that the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is spending significant time, energy, and effort. We are trying to look at the work of each and every one of the vast number of committees through AFWA and look at that work through a DE&I lens. It's all of our work. It isn't a committee, a box to check. It's incumbent upon all of us to view the work that we do through that lens. Recovering America's Wildlife Act, some of the most promising legislation for sustainable and dedicated funding for conservation with significant progress and momentum right now as we see strong bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. AFWA was working on state data aggregation systems in support of industry and R3 efforts, looking at development of dashboards. Again, I'm going to point to Rob Southwick and Southwick Associates for their role in that effort. Learning cultures, adaptive and innovative cultures, being aware of our bright spots and our blind spots, questioning our paradigms. This workshop, this RBFF workshop is foundational to adaptability and innovation. Step one is recognizing that need. We live in the information age. It's simple, fast, and easy to validate our perspectives rather than challenge them. Just read an article that people are now moving to places where people that have similar views live. It's a lot easier to pick up, move your entire family to a community where people think like you than it is to actually engage in a conversation with people who maybe think different or challenge your own paradigms. Going back to the plane analogy, you can always find someone sitting on the same side of the plane as you who sees the same thing. Where real growth and opportunity exists is in exchanging observations and perspectives with someone sitting on the other side of the plane. As we contemplate adapting and innovating to engage new customers, we need to be willing to do more than R3. Certainly, retention, recruitment, and reactivation are essential parts of the equation, but we need to do more than R3. Again, in Nevada, 1.4% of the citizens own a boat, 5% buy a fishing license, and 3.3% buy a hunting license, with significant overlap between those categories. So we could double or triple those numbers and still only have a single-digit percentage of the state's population for the most part. R3? Yes, definitely, absolutely. R3 and adaptability and innovation through relevancy, diversity, equity, and inclusion, One Health, and RAWA to engage new customers with thriving fish and wildlife and healthy, intact ecosystems and clean water. Where from here? I'm going to conclude with a couple stories of people's passings and the obituaries written in tribute to them. If you have a large, multi-generational family, you probably have difficulty keeping track of all your relatives. If that big family resided mostly in the same small community like me, you might use the local online version of the town's newspaper to figure out what they're up to and when one of your distant family members occasionally dies. So recently I've noticed something. I've noticed the significance of fish and fishing in particular in the obituary section of my hometown paper. So back in September, when AFWA's annual meeting was in Rhode Island, I shared that just a day or two prior, I was looking through the obituaries, and it struck me that there were maybe 9 or 10 obituaries, but 3 of them had fishing-related pictures or themes. One of them, the deceased was sitting in a chair, with a rod on a shoreline of a lake. Another one, the deceased was holding a large rainbow trout, probably like an 8-pound fish. And the third one, the guy had 2 smallmouth bass like this, probably 4-pound smallies. And it really struck me. It struck me that what we do, our opportunity to connect people with that resource is so profound, so significant, that is the most common theme, and now you're all going to go look at obituaries, and I'm going to be the sick-sorted person who sent you on that task, is so profound that when family members are trying to capture the essence of someone's life in the most meaningful, positive, happy way, they're showing those photos. So yesterday, I'm on the plane, and I check in to see if anybody I know, any relatives recently passed. And there's this story, there's another individual with this huge fish, and this story, he's a Berkeley med school grad, saved lives as an MD, but the highlight of the obituary isn't the lives that he saved, but the fact that he was quote unquote well known on many local lakes for his fishing prowess. So think about that. Let that sink in a little bit, the significance of that. That is the potential power of what we do. This is a great story. And in some ways, we've been punched in the face, but it isn't necessarily as bad as it sounds. How will we adapt and innovate to engage new customers? How about in order to adaptively and innovatively engage new customers, we inclusively meet people where they are as we contemplate with some self-awareness the uniqueness of others' perspectives. Thank you.
You stay here because of the mic. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, and we have time for a few questions. I really appreciate everything you shared there. I have heard you send people on the obituary note before, but now you have even a new one you shared. That's awesome.
I do.
And it really does speak to things. Questions for Tony, comments? Obituaries you just found, no. I know, oh yeah, sorry, Jennifer, I couldn't see you there.
I was just going to point. Hello? Does it work? Okay. I was just going to point out to everybody that if you do want to get involved on a national level with education, outreach, and diversity, Tony is the chair of the Education and Outreach and Diversity committees that have several different groups underneath them. But if any of those are of any interest to you to get involved with, Tony is here to talk to. And that's rare that we get an AFWA president here, so that's good.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I want to add, and I don't know if you want to speak to this a second, as part of that and what the group is doing is some of the subgroups, the diversity, equity, inclusion subgroup has been hosting some coffee talks in the community and invite space for those conversations, those challenging conversations. And I've experienced you and many directors in the room being very vulnerable and how trying to bridge that gap and experience that and what you're trying to do within your state. So I appreciate that you guys are offering that. I don't know if you want to add anything to it, but.
I'll just thank you for that opportunity. And the Education, Outreach, and Diversity Committee of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies that was formerly chaired by Dave Chanda has a number of working groups associated with it. There's outreach and marketing, which was just recently changed from outreach to outreach and marketing, thanks to Jen's input and dogged persistence, I might add. There is a watchable wildlife or wildlife viewing and nature tourism, conservation education, diversity and inclusion work group. Project Wild is in there, and there's one that I'm forgetting. That's the trouble of trying to go through lists before a crowd.
I didn't mean to put you on the
No,
spot
I
for
know.
that.
You gave me an out. You did give me an out. So I just, the diversity and inclusion group, there are some coffee talks. I don't know how many are familiar with those, but they are invaluable as far as leaning into some courageous conversations akin to what some of the powerful emotions and discussion that we had earlier this morning. And I think the desire, as I've heard it there, is that the more frequent we have these conversations and we talk about awkward things, the more comfortable we become, the less awkward they are. I heard one woman put it best, and she said, look, my name is Jennifer, and I want, people are going to say, well, do you want to be called Jen or do you like to be called Jennifer? And as simple and easy as that conversation is, people should be able to say, do you prefer black? Do you prefer African American? Do you prefer indigenous, Aboriginal, Hispanic, Latin? There's a whole myriad of things that are sometimes difficult or feel awkward to have those conversations. This is a venue in which to have those conversations, to lean in to potential awkwardness and make it easier and more commonplace.
Thank you, Tony. Comments, questions? And Steph, is there something online?
We have a comment online from Tom Lang, who says, wonderful job, Tony. To build on that, even with supplemental stocking, habitat enhancement, adding new waters, etc., there is a carrying capacity of users of our resources. Simply, that is a foundational piece of many of our fish and wildlife regulations. But I'd like for all to remember that there is no carrying capacity for supporters of our mission and efforts.
Thank you, Tom.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom.
We have another here.
Sorry, where are you? Oh, go ahead.
I think I can. Antonio Salgado, Oregon. Tony, thank you. At heart, Nevadan, grew up in Nevada, UNR, Wolfpack all the way. And every time I go back home, I struggle with the same thing whenever I want to take my friends home. Sorry, my friends fishing or hunting, but they don't speak English. I have to hold their hand and walk them through it. And I know Nevada has become really diverse over the past 20 years, and it is kind of disheartening not to see that reflected on the fishing and hunting side of things. Texas kind of blew us all completely out of the park with all the regs in Spanish for hunting and fishing. I'm trying to do the same thing in Oregon, trying to push that. California, another big Hispanic state, also doesn't have them. And my point here is, I appreciate everything you're doing. I appreciate that you're moving in that direction. Having said that, I think we can all understand and sit on the same platform that we have ways to go on it. We're still the same pictures as we were seeing earlier. We got to depict more diversity. We got to depict what we truly look like. I really appreciate from the first presentation also, the pictures were just ad hoc, people walking by, not staged. And that's what I'm trying to avoid through it. And I know on the DEI in AFWA and WAFWA, we're trying to address some of that stuff too. What is your advice, and maybe this isn't really an answer right now, but just for the future, as I'm moving into doing more things in Spanish, I'm running into the barriers, the systematic racism, the part of within the agency. And it was brought back to me, and it was like, hey, I'm facing this, what do I do about it? And it was like a really nonchalant way. It's like, well, it's a good thing we hear it inside the agency instead of just waiting for the public. It broke my heart, but at the same time, it's like, well, I knew I had to deal with it at one point or another. But again, as a director and a DI committee part of that, keep those things in mind and thought for that more than anything. So thank you again.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I just want to provide a super brief answer, at least, some of the challenges that we face. And we are, we're very small. I hear what Texas is doing in Florida and California, and I can only envy, having that kind of staff and that kind of capacity. We are pursuing making a subset of our regulations available in Spanish. But I'll share with you another barrier that we've encountered. We're subject to a great deal of oversight by our legislature. And a few years ago, we had a proposal. We had to seek funding from the legislature to provide Spanish signage, and it was $15,000, which is ludicrous in a lot of ways, not only that it requires legislative approval, but even more so that it was denied. And it was denied because we had certain legislators that were absolutely vehemently opposed to any of their licensed dollars going to put anything in any language other than English. And so that gets to some of the systemic struggles and the systemic challenges. And to that comment, another legislator responded, I think that's called racism. They buy licenses just like everybody. They're required to buy licenses just like everybody else. But it failed. But we're going to continue to try, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. He will be around for questions and comments and in the app too, so thank you very much.